Welcome to the Great Beer State podcast from the Michigan Brewers Guild. The Great Beer State is a weekly show sharing conversations and stories from the passionate people who contribute to our vibrant Michigan beer community. It is made up of a mix between full-length archived interviews from the Guild's first documentary book project, A Rising Tide, Stories from the Michigan Brewers Guild, and conversations recorded in the here and now. Each episode is kicked off with a conversational update from host Scott Graham, Executive Director of the Guild, and the beer-evangelist Fred Bueltmann, author of A Rising Tide. Here's Scott and Fred. Welcome to Michigan's Great Beer State. I'm Fred. I'm here with my good friend Scott, kicking off Season 2, Episode 13. We've got a very special guest today, which is yours truly, heading back to 2018. And we're heading into fall here. We've got colors starting to turn. It's good. It's still great outdoor beer drinking weather, which will bring us over to Detroit. Scott, what's up in your world or in the world of Guild leadership and festivals these days?
Well, it's a busy time. Fall seems to kind of creep up on us every year. We just came off of the UP Festival in Marquette, and we're fully geared up and in the final ramp up for the Detroit Fall Beer Festival. So we're pretty excited to be having that event and be getting together with friends and colleagues at the Eastern Market in Detroit for another beer festival. So I'm pretty excited about that. We've got a golf outing at Treetops in the works also, as well as our annual legislative day in Lansing, where we invite our members to town and try and connect with legislators on their home turf and really focus on building relationships and making sure that we've got a voice in the conversation with policy making in Lansing.
Yeah, that is exciting and a whole lot going on. And I hadn't quite acknowledged that we hadn't talked on here since the Fall Beer Fest in the UP, which was a remarkable experience. So that's got to feel good being back in the beer fest business. Any big takeaways?
It does feel good, and that was our first festival in more than a year and a half. And I have to say, everything worked out really great. It was truly one of the best festivals we've ever had. It was well attended. The weather was nice. It rained a little bit, but all in all, it was warm and beautiful, and people were in a good mood. It didn't seem to be any built up tension, and it just everything worked out really great. You know, it was the 20th anniversary of September 11th. It was on September 11th. It was really nice that the local law enforcement, with the Marquette Police Department taking the lead when I reached out to them, but they also worked with the local state police and sheriff to kind of do a little memorial for us, where they drove some cars around the park and stopped by the flag. And we happened to have Superior Pipes and Drums on site. So we had a bagpiper pipe Amazing Grace, and it was quite a moving little tribute to 9/11.
Yeah, it was a great way to come back overall. It all felt very us in a lot of different ways. And I was up there and we were busy, despite not having been on the air since we've been recording a lot of interviews and we're preparing for the 25th next year. So it was interesting to just touch base with so many people, including a lot of supporters of the Guild as well as Michigan breweries. So you'll hear more from that visit coming up soon, and more about the 25th.
Yeah, lots of great material being collected. Hopefully we get to continue sharing it.
Yeah.
With that, maybe we go ahead and look at our Brewers Dozen, which is actually a little bit less than a dozen this week. We're closing in on the second round through all the brewery members we have. We're not done yet, but This edition brings us back to Southwest Michigan, kind of picking up the pieces that we didn't get before, meaning there's a cluster of breweries we didn't mention in a previous episode, and they are south of Grand Rapids and outside of Kalamazoo. But we can get started by mentioning Five Lakes Brewing Company, which is in Dorr, which is just south of Grand Rapids off of 131.
Yeah, and kind of in the same neck of the woods, you've got Open Road Brewery over in Wayland.
Yeah, and in Allegan, there is, I may be mispronouncing it, but I think it's Schaendorf Brewing Company. It's kind of a farm-themed pub brewery. Cool operation.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you've also got Tantric Brewing Company in Allegan, who, if I'm not mistaken, are in a new location.
Yeah, I saw that somewhere. I haven't been to the new location yet, but I'm sure it's bigger and better for them. If we move on south a little further and get near Pawpaw, Lucky Girl Brewing Company is a Pawpaw address, but it's a little outside of Pawpaw.
And then you've got Pawpaw Brewing Company in Pawpaw as well. And this is a refrain you all have heard from me before, but it's really exciting to see towns like Allegan and Pawpaw supporting more than one brewery when those are towns that were just small enough and just off the beaten path enough that it took a minute before breweries were opening on Main Street or even outside of town there. So it's a pretty cool list to see the progress.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that when we head over to Lawton, it's the same situation. It's a 2-brewery town. The first one we're mentioning was the brew pub was added to a well-known local restaurant that for years had focused on import beers and different beers, and they added a little brewing operation, I think just out of their passion for specialty beer. But Big T Restaurant and Brew Pub in Lawton is a fun place to go.
Yep. And then you've got Barn Brewers Brewery in Lawton as well. And that building has some history, right? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, you are. I mean, that could take us back to stories of Phil Baylog and
Yeah.
Duster's Brewery or Duster's Brewing Company, which he was a very colorful character early on in the industry. And
then Old Hat
might make you think of Old Hat. Yeah.
Yeah, some interesting history over there in Lawton. And then you want to finish us up in Vicksburg?
Yeah, we'll wrap up by mentioning the Distant Whistle, which is in Vicksburg. There's another big project going on there too. The old paper mill is the Vicksburg Mill is an ongoing ambitious project, and I continue to see progress there. So we'll probably see a brewery in that location before too long.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings us to our interview that we're looking at with this episode. And we are going back into the archives from 2018. It's another really interesting interview. It is with you. And Emily Bennett is asking some of the questions as well as myself. So I don't think we need to spend a ton of time introducing it because it features you and I'm in there too. But it's a really great kind of documentary interview about the early days of the Guild, the history of the Guild. It's very interesting. It talks quite a bit about some of the early creative energy with both you and Eric Brigham as president, and made me think of presidents we've had more recently, like Scott Newman Bale from Shorts and Isaac Hartman from New Holland, that each have left their mark on the development of where we are. And it makes me think of things I'm working on now to continue to develop our trade association as well. I don't know if you had any thoughts about it before we head right over to the interview, but I'll give you a chance to say something.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a little, this is your life, hearing an interview like that involved kind of career history and decisions and things like that. So I think for a moment I want to thank Emily and Kyle. So the Rising Tide Volume 1 project was and Mary was overseen, was a collaboration of many, but Emily was really a little production coordinator and there at every interview and helping annotate them. And so that was really an interesting opportunity to invite her to ask me questions and have that sort of fresh perspective. So I just wanted to thank her for that. She did a great job on the whole project as well as this interview. Kyle was taking pictures and video. Mary did the book design, who's part of the Brewers Guild staff. So I think it's an interesting opportunity to give them a shout out. And then otherwise, overall, it kind of fired me up again. I think that at the tail end of that project is when we recorded this. Your and my interview were recorded on the same day. And I thought both you and Emily did a great job of pointing at some of the points in history and some of the reason, some of the reason behind any of this. Why is this industry different, and why does this project matter, and what's the point? And that gets me fired up. I think we're going to need to press the explicit button on this one. There are some passionate moments that include colorful language. So we might go through with a little bit of an editing touch on this one, but I think that's my takeaway. Is it's a really interesting look. I think with the you and I and the conversation as well, the history is the span of everything, and a lot of the nitty gritty details of what was going on structurally with the guild are referred to here in a way that a lot of the other interviews don't. They talk about the culture and the overall arc of our industry and our community and our association. I think this interview is unique in that we talk about a couple of really distinct turning points that made a big impact on whether our organization existed and what we might have accomplished. So I hope people find that interesting. And that's probably my big takeaway. I'll say that having listened to it a few years later, I'm fired up, and I think there's a lot to root for, and there's a lot for breweries of all ages that I hope they hear what we're encouraging, and I hope they hear the importance of working on a rising tide.
Agreed. With that, let's go right to the interview. And here's Fred Bueltmann.
Cheers.
Cheers.
This has been a very eye-opening project for me, coming from the outside, looking in, ish outside. Probably the most fun I've had is watching your face when I've been able to, because I'll get that, oh my gosh, the light bulb going off in Fred's head of either putting pieces together or learning something new. Fred, the first question you always start with is, how did you get into the industry? But I want to kind of flip that for you. What are you doing now, and how has what you've done in the industry prepared you for what you're doing now?
Well, I have stepped down from a 20-something year career in beer, and my phrase has been that I've launched myself into the world of independence. So I'm writing. I like to consider myself project-based. I'm doing some consulting and advising to various types of companies that could be in the beer and spirit and beverage world. But I think that you talk about how has my life in beer and the beverage industry prepared me, is that I like to think that our principles, our ethos, our mission forward sort of way of doing business is valuable to any company doing anything. That one of the silver linings, or one of the things that I started to put together over the course of my career, wasn't just that better beer is better living, or that it's great to do something you love. It's also that culture and developing teams that are doing work they feel is important is valuable to the people doing the work, to the communities they're contributing to. And so that has now really informed me and sort of pushed me to, instead of sort of resting for whatever's left of my career and kind of continuing this well-paved path, it's pushed me to advocate for more of that, and saying, I think I think there's so many benefits on both sides of contributing culturally that we want to encourage more people to do it, and we want to defend the environment for them to have the opportunities to do it. And that's kind of what I've pushed myself into. It's both trying to live what I believe in at the same time that I help others see that opportunity.
So where were you when the guild first started to be spoken of, even in kind of nebulous?
So my beer
properties?
career began in 91. I'd started home brewing probably in like 89 or 90, and I didn't really develop into an incredible home brewer, but I brewed several batches with a home brewing partner of basically extract, first edition of Papazian's book, and I got inspired by that, and at the same time, then I got an opportunity to work at a beer distributor with a bunch of specialty beers and imports in 91, and was still homebrewing then, and then I moved forward into, I realized this is an industry that attracted me creatively. I realized that business could include creativity. For the first time, I was pursuing a career as a professional musician, and this was the first time business seemed like something real and something that I could endorse creatively, that wasn't a threat to my soul or creative self. And so I kind of jumped in and realized that, I could also pay my rent a little easier, and maybe that'll protect the creativity in my music. So I got a job with Warsteiner for 2 years, which reminds me of Scott's story of kind of the Miller brewing side, where like, I got a crash course in education of what business is like and running a region and talking to wholesalers. And this wasn't a pretend hobby, that I had a steep learning curve, and it was real and it was fascinating, and I wanted to learn it. But on the other hand, it wasn't much of a love beer culture. It was figure out how to sell beer culture. And so after the early lessons of business started to feel comfortable and started to feel like I had some acumen, then I started asking bigger questions like, well, wait a minute, I've loved this other part of me that loves beer to start to fit in. And that's when I started to early in that I became aware the microbrewing scene was happening. This is 93. I'm in Chicago. There aren't much for Chicago breweries, but other microbreweries are starting to come into Chicago. They're having a hard time getting distribution. I'm at the specialty distributor. We don't have any of them because they weren't big enough yet. So they're kind of on the outside fringe, but we started to make friends. And as I moved to kind of mixed jobs there, but as I moved from the distributor to Warsteiner is when I met Larry Bell, because we shared the same distributor, which was this wine and spirit wholesaler that was doing a little bit of beer. And so we had some mutual friends, and it was kind of like this. It's sort of like getting handed a mixed tape with the up and coming artist, where you're like, well, this is underground. Nobody knows about this. And this looks a lot like what I was doing as a home brewer, but grown up and for real. Like, it had both its beauty and its blemishes were part of its charm, because the beers were hardly labeled. I mean, they were crooked, and the six packs were janky, and it seemed like not quite ready for prime time. But inside the bottle was something that really spoke to me and reminded me of what had started this path only 4 or 5 years earlier. And so I was moved, and I was a fan. I had rooting interest, but I also saw like, they need help bringing this to market. I just had a 4-year crash course in bringing beers to market. I should join that. They're missing me in that organization, so maybe this could fill the gap that I'm missing in this large organization that's just selling a single Pilsner, and their innovation was to add a light German Pilsner to the mix. I was like, so this really lights my curiosity, and at the same time, I think I can bring something that's missing. And so, but that was a 2-year conversation where I was bold enough and sort of courageous enough to say, Larry, if you're ever looking for somebody to help you. He was doing all the sales himself. He was president, owner, front person, salesperson. And I said, if you're ever looking for somebody to help with this, consider me interested. And you had to do that in back rooms at the time, because if Warsteiner knew I had offered to help a microbrewery, I would have been shown the door and by the end of the day. But I was still brave enough to say, I want you to know that I'm ready. And for the better part of 2 years, it was, I'd love to have that conversation. I'm not ready yet. I can't afford it. And I'm venturing into a long version of the story that may not all be relevant, but it was another brewery. Goose Island was moving from being a pub to going to distribution, and they were looking for their first sales manager. They talked to my close friend in the business, John Barabas, as their first pick, because they were just asking people around who are the movers and shakers in Chicago that should be up for this position. And John was first, and he didn't want to do it. And he wanted to stay where he was at the distributor that I sold to. So he was part of this. He was representing these specialty beers at wholesale. And I was the second name. And we were having long conversations, and without going down the whole laundry list, I didn't really agree with their approach to market. I thought it was a lot more like the importer, which was pushing price and pushing growth at any cost. And I had just grown up enough to cut my teeth to learn how I didn't want to sell beer. And I remember having these spirited conversations, and when they were preparing to offer me a job, and like our next meeting was going to be to offer me, I remember being frustrated and a little surprised that they wanted to hire me. Because it's like, I disagreed with everything. Why do you want to hire me? And that felt, instead of flattering, it felt discouraging. Like, I don't even think you listened. I think you just want to hire the guy that got the recommendation. We're going to fight like cats and dogs. So I went back to Larry and said, the time is now, or I'm going to go do this other thing. And, this version of the story is maybe need to be a little cosmetic for the purposes of sharing, but it's like, he said, well, you don't want to go work for them. I said, you're right, but I'm about to. So let's get this done. And the point of it is that we had this midnight meeting in Kalamazoo to find a way to make it work. And that's how I ended up in the Michigan beer scene, the craft beer scene, was getting this opportunity to come on board as the leader for sales and marketing for an organization that hadn't had anybody besides the owner do it in 1995, when there was still a handful of breweries in Michigan, but a bunch opening that year. So it was pretty exciting time, and I was trying to apply my love of beer combined with my recent education in terms of branding and distribution, and try to raise the professional organization, the level of professionalism in terms of our approach to market.
Did it feel like a huge risk at that time? Because it seems like, coming from Chicago, where you had a little bit, to me, I'm assuming more stability, coming into such a new market in Michigan.
It felt like a risk in the way that a 24-year-old measures risk, in that there was a bit of fuck it to it, and like, what's the worst could happen? I got to start over. And it felt like a risk because I was turning down a job that had probably twice the salary, and I had professionals like, what was his name? Rick, who's a broker? Blanking on his name. Anyways, there's a broker who represented Sierra Nevada and was kind of one of the industry gurus at the time that had put my name on the list. And when he heard that I was not taking the job, he set me aside and told me what a mistake I was making, that if I wanted to screw around, I should take the Bell's job. If I wanted to be a serious professional, I need to take this other job. So I was having a leading consultant in the business tell me I was an idiot. So there was some risk, and I didn't feel it was risky. I knew that I was making a decision that was not orthodox or guaranteed, and that we better make this work.
At what point, one of the things throughout the course of all the interviews, I keep getting this sense of a culture of camaraderie that just seems to have been spawned from almost nothing. It was a bunch of people got together, had a meeting, and then 20 years later we sit, and I have heard the word camaraderie over and over and over. That is not normal in business. It is not normal. I don't think, at least from my perspective, it's even normal in craft beer in different regions. Where did that come from? And Scott, I know you can probably help with this too.
It's interesting too, because I'm interested to hear the answer, but this is also at a time when the one thing that was identified that everybody had in common is that they wanted and needed to sell more of their own beer. That's the one thing everybody had in common, and the one focus of the guild when it started was that everybody wanted to sell and needed to sell their own beer. And so for camaraderie to come out of that.
Well, when everybody, I'm assuming, even for what you said about Chicago, that it was still competition, it was still,
Oh yeah.
How I'm fascinated with how that culture, was it just the right group of people together at the right time? Was it certain leadership? I mean, if you're coming into this at 24, that's really young to be making those kind of decisions and having those realizations. And I'm assuming you were probably about the same age.
It's old enough to make them poorly. I will say that I think the beverage business has a spirit of camaraderie to it to begin with, but it's sort of related to jerseys, and so those can change. If you think about the sports metaphor, like, because I was coming from Chicago, where at the distributor you had camaraderie with your fellow salespeople, although you were trying to beat them, but you weren't selling against each other. They had that territory. I had my accounts I wanted to win, but the other distributor, they were the enemy, and so you couldn't fraternize with them, but you could hang out with somebody who was also doing your job as long as you were on the same team. And then same with suppliers. So we liked our suppliers. And then when I became one with Warsteiner, I sold to a distributor, and this is how I moved in the industry, is that we were friends with other suppliers of that distributor. So we were all rooting for our distributor team to do well for all of us. And so there was some etiquette in terms of, there were specific unwritten rules about you don't take another handle from the house. So like you're a supplier that has to support your wholesaler against the other wholesalers. So that meant the other suppliers, the way Bell's was to Warsteiner and New Amsterdam and these other, if they were in your same house, you had a certain understanding that, yes, you were responsible for your own success, but there was your cousin over there, and you both needed your wholesaler to win. And so it depended. It was conditional camaraderie. But I certainly benefited from it in Chicago, a really big city. When you're selling specialty beers, you are a small little blip in this very complex competitive sea in Chicago. So I definitely learned from, felt the support of, and admired my colleagues that were selling other brands. But it was conditional to whether they were in the right place for me to do so. If a supplier left wholesalers, in some ways they were dead to you. You might still be friends with them, but you couldn't really go to accounts and hang out in the same way. I think that's loosened over the years, but in the early 90s. So I did bring some of that with me. I felt that I was exposed to the benefits of it. And I think that as a human being, I'm naturally inclined to appreciate those values. But I also was coming from the city, which is a competitive place to live. I mean, and so I did come a little bristly and ready to go to battle, and I had my ass on the line, and I had a company that was loved as a brand and growing, but basically duct taped together and could fail at any moment. So there was a lot of intensity in terms of survival. And so figuring out who's in your jersey while there's new entries every year and different distributors, I agree with what you're saying, and I think there was a recipe for it to be more hostile than it ended up being. And I often credit the meeting and the formation of the Michigan Brewers Guild as the flashpoint that kept that from becoming hostile. It was because we got in the same room, because we drank beers together, and then because we committed equally to hosting a festival with 0 paid employees, we became the same team working for this shared goal of trying to not lose our ass in a festival. And all of a sudden we were wearing the same jersey. And so now we had cousins and we had people who we were rooting for. And I would say the 2 years that I was in Michigan prior to that, this is one of the things this project has enlightened me with. I felt everybody felt the way I did, which was that it was hostile for 2 years. Everybody else is saying, I came into this industry and it was pretty welcoming, and we saw these guys opening a brewery and we were in the same boat and we borrowed grain and then the Guild kind of emphasized and amplified this camaraderie that was already there. And I started to realize, well, okay, my experience was maybe more unique because I'm a city guy that still lived in the city, but I was working for a 12-year-old brewery. I was working for a essentially 9 and then 10-year-old brewery, the only established microbrewery with the end of Frankenmuth, who also wasn't really in the same category. And so all these openings all had, Bell's and Kalamazoo Brewing listed as their proof of concept in their business plans, and listed as, well, if we get X% of their business. So I remember describing I felt targeted. I felt like these distributors are coming after our handles. These breweries are frequently talking shit about us. Some more than others. We had friends. I don't want to sound like it was completely an island. But most of these breweries opening on different parts of the state we didn't have relationships with. And even if they were admiring and saying, hey, Bell's inspired me to do this, they were still creating their piece of the pie from what we had established. And I'm now newly responsible for our sales growth going, the wolves are at the door. We got to make sure we win. And some of that was my city upbringing, and some of it was that we weren't a fellow one-year brewery the way everybody else was. They were all in the same experience. And so it's just dawned on me that my pivot is even different than Larry's, but Larry and I were kind of the two people that were engaged as the face of Bell's. And I just started to realize my pivot may have been different than others, because that meeting at Hamilton Street Pub, and then especially the first Summer Beer Festival, created relationships that entirely changed my perspective. And then subsequent years, which sort of invited and encouraged me to work towards a more collaborative community and do everything I could to protect that and encourage it.
How you doing, Scott?
Good.
Okay. At what point did you realize that your participation with the Guild was going to be an important part of what you were doing professionally?
I would say from the very beginning. I mean, even though at the first meeting I was in the conversations with Rex, I was a point person for things like Beer Guide, even though they also had a relationship with Larry, and I was new. There was still I was handling those things on Larry and Bell's behalf. So I was part of the conversation of going to Saginaw instead of, I was thinking, we're not going to be comfortable going to one of these other places. And this has come up a few times, this idea of neutral territory. And I describe in hindsight, it seems like it could be petty, but I really didn't want the Guild to be seen as the Bell's show. And I thought if Larry has a big personality, Bell's had a big presence, and if everybody thinks this is a Bell's Guild, there's going to be some lukewarm interest, and that it could lessen the amount of trust. And so that was part of what was behind saying, if we want this to succeed, I think we need to form it as on equal footing. And that is a different side of that doesn't feel like, we're grinding against each other. It was sort of like, let's make sure we even this out so that this isn't one brewery weighted, which the market was very one brewery weighted at the time. And so from that first meeting, I felt like my voice was heard. I felt like my insight offered something. I also felt like I was an important second half to the Bell's conversation because Larry led one way and I offered a different part of that in terms of both execution and also influencing how our company managed the energy of our connection to the Guild. And so as Larry was elected to the first board as president, I was still doing a lot of the groundwork there. So I was in meetings and I was support, which prepared me for joining the board. I think 3 or 4 years later, I had been doing work in support of Larry, and then eventually was also, I really ended up being sort of the branding liaison under the first, I would say presidents 2 and 3, which were Tim and Drew. We were using our ad agency, Black Lab, which was Trevor Rohrbeck at the time, became Black Lab 5, and I brought them in. So I continued to be this go-between between the board and our creative team, which was, I felt, a strength and a skill that I could volunteer and to contribute, and then also really helped me understand the landscape better, and that prepared me for and inspired me to want to be on the board. And I think it gave me a deeper perspective of what small breweries look like, because I'd come from the world of Chicago where I dealt with imports and then specifically a German brewery. And then Bell's, which was small by my standard, but much larger than any of the other breweries that were opening. So maybe a long answer, but I felt like I knew from the beginning I wanted to be involved and I wanted to make this something great, and I thought it was important. And then the first few years were finding what I could contribute and getting educated on this new scene, which was small companies creating things out of thin air. Everything else that I had seen up until being at Bell's was established brands developing markets for themselves, 100-year-old imports and domestic beers and stuff like that.
So this leads me, I've been waiting to ask this question, and it's the perfect lead in. It's a 2-part question. First is, I'd like you to reflect on the early leadership at the Guild, board and president, both either, and then follow that up with your own reflection and recollection of your leadership on the Guild. And I want to take a moment to do this because it may or may not have come out or may or may not come out, but the Guild got to where it is. I mean, there's been a certain momentum the last 6, 8, 10 years, but a key part of those first years, the Guild had this creative and energetic and visionary leadership from Fred Bueltmann that led it to become a lot of what it is, that gave it a lot of the early direction. It really benefited from your leadership, which lasted for quite a few years. But I mean, at times being involved, it was frustrating because you're really great at launching balls in the air, and it can sometimes be difficult to keep them in the air. But that's the creativity and the vision. I think you saw things and said, well, this is something we should be doing, so let's do it. So 2 parts, one, early leadership, and then your leadership.
Well, I think the early leadership was, important early founders of their companies that, had they not been involved in the leadership, I think it was crucial that they be involved so that people believe that it represented the industry. But there are also founders that were either busy starting their brewery or continuing it running. And so it was very much block and tackle. Let's execute the things right in front of us, which was we need bylaws. We need an attorney. We need bylaws. We need to get status as a nonprofit so that we can qualify for a special license, which will let us do this festival. And then we need a festival. So it was blocking and tackling. And again, all volunteer, but with owners and presidents, and then another ring of interested people helping with the execution. But we did agree that we wanted to promote Michigan beer, but we didn't really work on a lot of message work or what we were going to do with it, or we also didn't shape much depth to that message. I mean, our slogan was "Drink Michigan Beer." It was, and I remember putting the bumper sticker prior to the Guild getting established. We made a Bell's bumper sticker that I remember sending off to Cummings Label, and it was just like, we're going to make this simple. And I thought it was interesting also to present to the customer a brewery saying a message besides drink their beer. Man, that's as simple as seemed like an outlandish shift, as common as it is now. But the boards in those early years weren't doing much of that. It was the engaged people getting inspired by the fact that we had a group finding ways to offer their own color, and the boards were, besides that, they were also sort of short-lived. That, okay, after the first year there was a change. I think they might have been one-year terms, or people, there was also some movement like, okay, I did what I could to get it started. I got to get back to not spending all this time, and I'm neglecting things at my brewery. So I think Larry was a one-year term, and Tim was a one-year term, and Drew might have been 2. And I was on the board with Drew maybe for his whole term, but I had also worked with him prior to that as sort of, he was branding, I think, on the board, so he and I had been collaborating where I'd been doing some of that work. So there was a nice growth into, when I came on the board, we were kind of a 1 and 2 punch, for lack of a better comparison. And I'm pretty sure I was on 1 year, and then when Drew stepped down, I continued. I grew into his role as president. And so I felt like the early leadership was essential in terms of getting us established as a legitimate entity. And those were also things that weren't my strong suit. And so the timing worked out well, where like I was developing as a business person, I was developing as a brewery person, voice. And so I felt like I was taking a handoff. I'm like, okay, great, we got that established. Now we can start to talk about what influence, what change we want to make. And so I tried to lead that shift in many different ways in terms of our voice and our messaging. I tried to rally engagement from members, and our early meetings were chaotic and either poorly attended or heavily attended and more chaotic. We didn't always have a lot of it didn't look pretty. It often included some frustration of either nobody's replying and saying stuff to us, or they're unhappy with what we're doing. And it didn't feel like unrest. It just, the old phrase of like herding cats. It was just that we were organizing a group of independent thinking entrepreneurs who don't organize well. And so I feel like those were things I was focusing on, is gaining unity and both modeling and encouraging camaraderie in terms of we can think differently and still get along and work through this. And then trying to develop a deeper message than drink more of our beer because we need you to. I thought, what's in it for the customer, and what's in it for the community, and what are we offering? And so those were things that I didn't do alone, but I felt like that's what I was poking at, was we need to evolve, we need to grow up. And I was prideful in terms of where we had grown to have that opportunity, but I was always pushing for us to continue to grow up and be. We were laughed at industry in the larger beer market as individual breweries or as an organization. We weren't considered legitimate. We were a fad that was surely going to go away and stop bothering people anytime soon. So from a governmental point of view, from a wholesaler association point of view, from a large chain retailer point of view, we were a joke. And that pissed me off. I thought we were changing the world and making strides to provide quality choices to people, and we were making a difference. And I wanted to make more difference. I wanted to continue to clear the path for us to make those great changes that I thought we as a group were contributing. And I wanted people to respect it. And so I was motivated to strengthen our voice, which I knew would happen if we were together, and it would be splintered and divided and weakened if we were not.
So I want to make sure that as you go through putting together the finished piece, you need to give Fred Bueltmann due credit for his role and what he did. And it might be a challenge for you to feel self-serving, but to me, it's a really important, this is about the history of the Guild. And you were there for, 7 or 8 or 9 years, whatever it was. And I see it as really important developmental part of the Guild's success. I want to make sure that you find a way to talk about that and not shortchange it in the finished piece because you happen to be the one putting it together.
Yeah, it will be a challenge, but I also appreciate it. I'm proud of it, and we'll find a way. But I don't think individual credit is crucial either, so it may be somewhere in between where I do think it's important to see the turns we made in the eras. So, the era represented, or that I happened to be leading, was a very important era, and we made significant changes. Yes, I was in the role, and I may have been pushing some of that, but none of it was done alone. We had strong, committed boards. We had people agreeing to stay in the conversation even when things weren't popular. I am proud that I led us through some discourse that we found unity through disagreement. I felt like one of the things I'm proud of isn't really those early years of cheerleading and getting us to believe we could have a stronger voice. I'm proud of, there's a couple of, I'm thinking of 2 things. I think there's probably more, but there's 2 things that pop up for me that I'm grateful to have led. One of them was even though I had helped create or promote it, I don't remember which, the Drink Michigan beer, which is not, a big creative authorship thing, but I was behind that effort of stamping that out and repeating it and saying we need a simple message. Then I was also behind realizing we had to grow past it. That as I was developing as a branding professional, I was like, we can't be asking for sympathy here. We can't be saying buy local because we need you to and because we're local. We have to make this a qualitative conversation. We need to stop discounting and start trumpeting that you should consume, you should engage with our products because they're an enhanced experience and that there's something to this, and it's an elevation of quality. And one of the things that gives me a lot of pride doing all these interviews is everybody's talking about quality. We weren't. We were talking about we need more business back then. People were quality driven, but I feel like one important pivot was when we added the Great Beer State, and we let Drink Michigan Beer become a sub message, and we started creating enthusiast tours and early entry, and we started improving access, and we said if people are engaged and want to be a consumer member of this, we want to give them access to an elevated experience instead of a lower price. It was really important, and it was not universally accepted. But I was really proud when we carried that flag forward, and I think it's become an underlying, not so secondary part of our ethos. And then the other one was that I saw I felt like I heard an alarm that other people didn't hear. I was into a few terms of presidency. Everything was increasing in terms of the amount of work, the amount of time that it took. Our organization was becoming more complex to run. I was starting to fatigue, not in I can't do this anymore, but I was just starting to realize this is a second job that I'm having to commit an awful lot of time to, in addition to my other really busy job. We're in the middle of a fight for our lives in terms of industry, I felt. Not to over dramatize, but it was still tough. We were becoming popular as a segment, but it was hard work. And so I was looking around at who's next and how long can I do this? And it wasn't like, I don't want to do this anymore out of the work. I feel like this was a certain maturing point for me as a professional too, is what really moved me was saying, shared vision needs shared leadership. That if I continue, nobody's gonna, not to sound overconfident, but I knew that my leadership was appreciated, and I knew that I wasn't gonna get voted out. I was like, this is a lot of work. Nobody wants to take this over. It makes sense in a semi-flattering way that I have the seat as long as I want it. And I enjoyed the work, and I benefited from the work. I felt like it made me a better professional. But it was insight that I gained from working with this group of talented people that told me that's not what this organization needs. It doesn't need one person to stay at the helm and make all these decisions. If we're going to grow up our organization, it's time to let somebody else put their hands on the wheel.
Can you put that into like a time frame? When was that?
Well, I feel like it ended up straddling my time between Bells and New Holland. So I think that we went to Urich in 04 or 05, probably 05, probably the spring of 05. Because my presidency had a gap in it when I stepped down from Bells in the fall of 04. And it was only a month before I was at New Holland, but at the beginning of the following years when I was reappointed to the board. Because without being at a brewery, I couldn't hold our bylaws prevented me from holding a seat. So, and I'm pretty sure we executed that after I was at New Holland, so it must have been 05. But the years prior to that were when I knew it was coming. So it had taken a lot of research and a lot of figuring out. We didn't have the money to hire an individual yet, in our opinion. We didn't have uniform acceptance that that's what we should spend money on, and that how are we going to manage them. There was a lot of questions of, we only have so much money. We're supposed to be marketing the guild. Now we're gonna pay a person. And so I kind of started a couple year. I don't think I necessarily had the whole big picture laid out, but I knew I was seeding an idea and fertilizing it frequently, which is, as we grow up, when we get bigger, when we get a stronger budget, as these festivals grow, we're going to need to figure out how to bring in professional management, because we're getting to the edge of what we can handle as a volunteer board. And at that scope of work, we realized we're also talking about, I don't know how many breweries we had then in the state, maybe 80 or 90 or probably more than that.
75 or 80 probably.
But I was just looking around and everybody, I just didn't know how we're going to continue to provide boards with this amount of work. Like, people are going to come in, they're going to see this amount of work, and they're either going to decline or they're going to drop out after 6 months because they didn't bargain for that and they have their own business to run. So it was a few years, and then our first foray was, and this was with considerable dissent. I can remember, I think I still have the PowerPoint presentation, which was, some cliche about going to the next level. And so we were not as a board required to have a membership vote on this, but I felt we can't go forward without a membership vote. We're just going to be seen as making decisions without input. And so I can't remember if it was a bylaw change or not, but we put it out there that it's time to have professional help, and we have found an organization who serves as an executive director for multiple trade associations. So we end up being one sort of client in their house, and it was a management company, I think is what they called themselves, out of Lansing. It was going to also mean a shift from our promotion-only environment. We weren't looking to represent ourselves in Lansing yet and make legislative or governmental change. We were simply authorizing ourselves to provide members with a quarterly update so that we would be notified of upcoming bills, and we weren't even going to take a position on it. It was so ironed out in that our place of harmony was to stay out of government, that even the idea of publishing a quarterly update on what you should know about Lansing was contentious. And we were doing these two things at the same time. We need professional management, paid professional management, and we're going to take step one towards being legislatively aware as an organization. And I do believe we said this is step one of several, that eventually we're going to need to have a voice, and we're going to need to grow up and get past our differences, or we're going to be left out of the conversation like we are right now. So we knew that. And that was contentious, and and so here I'm coming in at a new company, returning president, which is actually continuing my term, presenting an idea that was unpopular and being campaigned against. And I say that not for all the specifics, but because we persevered. And we grew up.
Do you think that was a tipping point?
Absolutely.
Or was that the tipping point?
Well, I would say it was like the first step of a tipping point that you stumble over and almost fall down the stairs. Because, just to put it bluntly, I put my ass on the line and basically said, I'm the president, you're asking for leadership. I'm telling you we have to go this way, and I would like your vote. And I don't know what the vote was, but it was several meetings of debate, and then we went ahead with it. But it was sort of like, if it failed, it was going to be my ass. And then I was watching it fail because Uric didn't understand beer culture, didn't understand our speed and intensity of work. It was also sort of weird where I was watching the amount of work our volunteer board was doing, and it was crushing this professional organization that's supposed to be old hat at this. And so I also realized, okay, we're not a normal plug and play sort of organization, and our culture matters. So people are really upset by this shift that is not culture rich or not congruent.
Looking back, do you think that highlighted how important that was? And was that an avenue in which people all of a sudden took a step back and said, holy shit, this really is who we are?
I think it highlighted it to the board. I think if you were on the outside rings of the organization looking in, there was some question of what the hell are these guys doing and who are these people? And I called the office and they didn't even know anything about anything. So there was both. There was I think we were called into question more than we had been in previous years. But the board and the next ring of people that were on committees and supporting the board, I feel like it also was confirming in a terrifying way, because we wondered if we just made a mistake that was going to cost us the trust of our membership. But it was confirming that, yes, what we were able to get, the reason we were able to grow past it is because we were able to say, we've confirmed we need professional assistance, but we need somebody else, and we need somebody who is from us and of us and understands our culture and can speak to our members and build confidence and knows what a brewery is facing and doesn't treat them like a regular commodity business, sort of turnkey deal. And so that error in judgment or that stumble, I'm not even necessarily saying it was a bad decision, it was a bad result. That stumble gave us the clarity to say, we need our own executive director with 100% of our share of mind that's not just providing these services in terms of mail and phone and conference room. We need somebody who can be part of our voice and part of our ear, and our culture is unique. And so that set us on a search. We also had to grow up as business people, because uncoupling a contractual agreement is harder than coupling. And so we had to unpack how to get out of Uric, and on top of running our festivals and all this other stuff. And then we had to search and hire an executive director. And I think a community like ours, with the camaraderie we had and support we had, they'll forgive a misstep. We've all made them. But you don't want to make a second one.
I don't want to cut you off.
No, that's
I do want to refocus. You made reference to the point that you were kind of at the helm and in leadership at a certain time when the guild was going through some of the things it would have gone through anyway, and that's probably true, but I want to re-emphasize the fact that we had your leadership and it contributed a lot. There are two leaders that particularly contributed, and as we've grown up, I think we've learned that we don't want permanent long-term leadership for the health of an evolving and kind of living organization, but there has to be some dwelling on your leadership and Eric Brigham's, because they have given a lot to the organization and taken a lot. If there are two individuals that I would highlight, you two are, really significant players in the growth and success and development. Eric maybe more structurally, you maybe more foundational vision and direction, and part of that's because of the timing, part of it's because of personalities. But those are really two key people, and I don't see us ever going back to that kind of long-term leadership. You never know. It's our focus not to, but it was really important to getting the guild to where it is.
Well, thank you. And, kind of returning the compliment, I did feel like long-term leadership was important to a degree. And so when you say, when did you start thinking about it? I knew that I wanted to reflect shared vision and shared leadership, but that I couldn't just step out of the moving vehicle. I mean, I felt like I've got an obligation to get this thing to a place where I feel I can let go. And I didn't feel it was there for most of my presidency. And it's not a lack of confidence. I just had a unique role within the boards. And you talk about vision and leadership. And so working that into returning the compliment is that hiring Scott and having him come on as executive director, and I believe it was at the completion of your first year or something along those lines. I mean, the minute we had you hired, and I'd worked with Scott before, so there was a comfort zone, but then also making sure that it was sort of working. It was having an executive director on board that we trusted, that I trusted, that we believed in, that gave me the confidence to say, now I can. And I feel like prior to that having me as the first long-time president of the board gave us continuity in some of the most challenging times to an organization, when mistakes could cost you the organization. A bad festival could have ended us, frankly put, and almost did a couple times. And then Eric, I also credit with, I feel like, coming out of that long-term leadership and moving into this need to become more structural and hiring staff. And we realized it took me a couple years to get one staff member sort of funded and approved philosophically. In Eric's next 6 or 8 years, or 8 or 9 years, whatever it was, we grew to 3 staff and paid consultants, and grew to a complexity of budget and resources and festival support, and from 2 festivals to 4, and a couple of them being multiple days. And so the support network and the structure required continuity to figure that out, and to take 4-year projects. It's really tough to do a 4-year project if you change the captain every year. Mm-hmm. And I also feel that coming out of my years, if we would have just gone right to rotating, I think there would have been the potential for an erosion of confidence that, okay, well, now we can't keep a president. So I feel like the confidence of our membership, the confidence of our public, the confidence of Lansing, we also grew to have a lobbyist representing our interests. The confidence of our industry colleagues was shored up by some consistent leadership over the years. And now our model has shifted to where currently the consistency, the continuity in terms of multi-year projects and multi-year relationship has shifted to executive director, which empowers a rotating board providing influence and opinion and direction rather than legwork. So that model shift, you start to realize took 15 years to grow up and to earn confidence and prove that you could do things as an organization, and then to change how you represent continuity is a real maturing process that none of us could have written a script for. We didn't have a book of like, well, once you get this done, then you go to that. This was passionate people looking around, caring for their industry, and figuring out collectively what to do next and what they could contribute. And I'm really grateful I had the opportunity to contribute what I did, and that it's valued. And I look around and I see dozens of other people that have made the organization what it is, which I'm deeply proud of. The spirit of collaboration and camaraderie that we've held through difficult times is what's going to get us through these difficult times. Universally, we're hearing people saying it's changing, it's getting more competitive, it's tough out there, there's a lot of breweries. True. And so that can be a threat to that camaraderie, and it's our existing strength and connectivity as a group that will perhaps encourage some people to not take the step too far and not go into too vicious or hostile of a competitiveness. They're difficult times. We will definitely bristle at times, but I think our community is more safe from bad practices between competitors than a state that does not have the connective tissue and strength of support and relationships that we do. So the work we've done for the last 25 years is going to influence how we move through the next 10.
So, and it is worth noting too that not a lot of people have perspective on just the sheer quantity of work that Fred and Eric both did for the Guild. Eric even more so. The sheer quantity of work and commitment is something that most people wouldn't know.
It's been very interesting to me to constantly hear, and I know you're going to know what I'm talking about. We had so many people during these interviews say, a rising tide lifts all ships. Yeah. And I heard that particular economic phrase over and over and over. How do you start passing that on? And I know we're sitting at about 55 minutes or an hour, and I know you got to go quick. But
well, and I've got one more thing that I want to get into.
So. How do you push that out? And this question, I guess, is more for both of you. How do you push that out to the new breweries? I mean, we're pushing 400.
Well, there's two challenges. One is that these breweries are growing up. Even the human beings in the breweries have grown up. Many of them, if they're, say, 25 or 30 years old, they grew up in a rich craft beer market. So tied us up. We grew up when you could see the mud, and we were hoping for a little tide to get this boat that's unstuck.
Yeah.
And so I think that one of the challenges, and actually at the root of this project, is some of the breweries don't understand, understandably, they don't necessarily grasp for what the need is. So we're competing amongst this already strengthened piece of the pie that, 10, 11% of the business, or maybe 15 or 20 in key markets, is a lot of business. And so I can just operate within that, which means whatever sales you get is coming from somebody else that's already in that segment. That starts to bear the competitive energy and feeling like you lost business to somebody next door, because you did. And so one of the things that we have to shore up is that just because things have leveled off, and just because acquisitions have added formerly craft numbers to their share of the craft. So we have large breweries outside of our segment dressing as micro brewed beer, or owning former members. Just because that has created some plateaus and some concern and some ambiguity and confusion does not mean we should just rest and say, I guess 11% is it. We have to believe that the products we make, the culture we represent, is worthy of a larger part of the market than saying 80% of the market should be run by these large international conglomerates. If we don't, as small brewers, actually believe that we're worthy of a larger piece of market, then we won't get it. And then we will be competing for the meager offerings that the rest of the market allows us to have. And so we have to challenge our perception that this is good enough. And because we're popular and because people are talking about us and there's a brewery on every corner, that we should be happy with that. We have to not be complacent. We don't need to be greedy either. Growth can be slow and measured, but we should not settle for saying, hey, you're popular, people love craft beer now. Look, it's in the airport. Isn't that good enough? I don't know. If people want access to independently owned, creative, quality conscious offerings, they should have it. And our competitors are those that don't believe in that principle, and they should not be able to close the door for us and say, 10%, that's enough. I just don't believe in it. And so to me, that sort of energy, that sort of belief of we are changing the world. We're not just trying to survive and have the growth report look better. We are trying to provide better choices for people that want them. And yes, the beer may not change when some acquisition happens, but if you trust those large international conglomerates to protect the marketplace, take a look at the 70s and 80s and see how it was.
Excellent.
Try to control the camera.
So I'm going to share one little anecdote, which is, I still remember the meeting when we had decided to do our first beer festival. Plans are in place. There's a location. Other details were coming together, and I distinctly remember recognizing that nobody had mentioned how we're going to have beer there. And so I volunteered to take the beer piece. I'll arrange getting the beer there. And we had some resources at Big Buck. You know, we had a refrigerated trailer, and I had a driver, and we could rent a tractor and get that there. And so I took that on and figured out how to get beer that wasn't in distribution there, do some contract brewing for brew pubs to have their beer there. And at that point, Eric was working at Big Buck, and he helped with the beer project at the first beer festival. And to this day, even with Eric off the board of directors, he's now part of the volunteer team that's part of the festival. He has been involved with every single beer order for every beer festival, and for many years he did it, and now he still coordinates it and executes it. So just interesting little story, really important behind the scenes. But you're one of my favorite storytellers, and I would like you to just maybe record one story, if you can find one that's like appropriate and palatable for the camera.
So a story about anything, or
beer related,
yeah,
somehow beer related.
I do find Eric's continuity in terms of the puzzle piece of arranging beer for these festivals to be, just unparalleled, and that's sort of continuity that builds trust in our support network. Anyways, in terms of stories, I don't know. One that just came to mind always makes me laugh, which is and I think it speaks to the camaraderie, because in a few years, I feel like, I wouldn't have known breweries in Detroit without the Guild. I was trying to survive and make our brand known and traveling between Chicago and Michigan. And if I was in Detroit, I was selling to accounts, and other microbreweries that may have been perceived as a competitor weren't going to be on my route list, and I had X amount of time. So the relationships that developed were awesome, and here's an example of sort of the comfort level we had with each other. So we were in Aubrey's. The festival had moved to Frog Island, and it was post-festival, so we were letting it rip and moving on to non-beer beverages like tequila next to our beer. And John Leonardos, who's an interesting, character, is with us. I don't know if you were here for this or not.
I was there.
Yeah, okay, good. So there was like probably 5 or 6 of us, and I think it was John who noticed it, but he's like, they got this Aubrey's sign that's saying no sleeves, no service, but they're selling a sleeveless t-shirt. How can you sell a sleeveless t-shirt and then not allow it in your own place? And so we're waxing on this hypocrisy. And so at some point, I just reach over and I grab his shirt sleeve and yank it off. And then I grabbed his other one and yank it off. So he's standing in a now sleeveless T-shirt. And the bartender is looking at us like, oh, finally a reason to cut these idiots off. And so he's kind of like, it's true. You can't stay in here without sleeves on. And we were just laughing through tears. It felt so like ridiculous and funny. And it doesn't really have anything to do with anything other than that. Our comfort level was such that we were able to celebrate together. We were able to give each other shit. We were able to rip a sleeve off each other's shirt and laugh about it instead of protect our space. And we could have been competitors. We could have been guarded. And that was hysterical because then I pursued to, I believe I bought him an Aubrey sleeveless shirt, size medium, which was all they had, which he declined. So I, in my XX stature, donned this medium sleeveless shirt and continued to venture out onto Cross Street and Ypsilanti to in hilarity, full of hilarity. So I don't know why that popped in mind, but
I still remember it as a funny
I can't remember
episode.
laughing harder
Yeah.
than when it all went down.
And we've been given a couple of those stories throughout the course of this project.
I think, there's a bunch of them that involve some sort of suite and Marriott. We got Scanlon to tell the wedding party story. I don't know if we told this one on video or story, but also in terms of our gregarious inclusion. So Pat Scanlon was staying in the room. He was a festival coordinator, and I was the president. So we had adjoining rooms to a suite that was hospitality driven after the festival. And so we came back, we were there Friday and Saturday night. So Saturday night we get there after the festival. There's beers everywhere. We're at this big long table and we're partying and having a good time. And everybody's like, where's Scanlon? And the adjoining door is closed, which is unusual. And I don't know, maybe he went to sleep, and we're just mocking him. And so pretty soon a group of practically torch-wielding rioters are pounding on the adjoining door, telling Scanlon to get the up and get out of your bed, you asshole.
I can remember, you open up this fucking door. And we're
Pounding
beating
on
him.
And then pretty soon, in the midst of our revelry, security's at our door telling us that we're shut down and with authority. And so it wasn't the sort of, hey, keep it down. It was like, this is over. And so we moved down. We were all kind of bent out of shape a little bit because that wasn't the norm. And in the morning, I'm checking out, and through bleary hungover eyes, I'm responsible for the house account as president. So they're doing this thing, and I feel like the manager she may have been giving me some feedback on like what went down last night. I can't quite remember how it went. But I'm confused because she said we had complaints, that's it. And I walked there confused. And then we end up talking to Pat. I'm like, where the hell were you last night? It's like, man, I got back from the festival and I had one little bag with me, which I brought to the festival. I got back from the festival. My key didn't work in the room. I went to the front desk. They said housekeeping thought I'd left, so they checked me out.
So he went home.
Yeah, so he went home and they put somebody else in the room, which we had, I still like want to argue with them because I'm like, we paid for everything. But they, in a housekeeping checklist of, is the guest still here? Got checked, no.
No.
So they put some poor, innocent human being in this room next to us who we had to have terrified.
Probably still scarred.
Yeah, like I can't imagine being on the other side of the door. And then I felt like, oh, and that's our fault? Like who? We know well enough. We had learned enough about ourselves to insulate ourselves with empty rooms. Anyways, that was That was an interesting discovery. I mean, I guess one last thing I'd add is that, one of the things I've been asking people is what is important for a new brewery to understand or why to engage. And
That's what I was going to add.
I think we probably have this answer from several other people, and this won't be necessary. But I always encourage people to understand that, the value proposition has been solved. The cost of membership shouldn't be even in consideration. What you should be evaluating is how can I engage? What's the cost of engagement? What's the value of engagement? So the more you attend, the more you speak up, the more you contribute. The conference should be an absolute. All the things, especially between the things, the conversations in the hallway, the small talk before, during at an event or at a hospitality tent, at a festival, or after a presentation at the conference. That is where we build connective tissue. So I hope that new breweries don't look at the should I join and what do I get from my membership. That's been addressed. You get more than your dollar amount. The question ought to be, how can I connect and join this group of colleagues that are like-minded and working together to make things better? That's the question, and I hope more people find a way. That means volunteering to run on the board, but you're going to be a better board member if you have engaged for several years and understand the terrain and the mechanics and the infrastructure of the organization. That's a good time to go on the board versus saying, if I'm going to get involved, I need to be there. Well, it's going to be hard because people don't know you, and it's going to be hard because you're getting a 10-year education in a week if you were elected. So engage is my encouraging words to any brewery at any level, age or size.
One of the things that I wanted to make sure that I told both of you while you're both in the same room is I don't know if you understand the trickle-down effect about what you guys created. That trickle-down effect has even gotten to somebody like me, not just the fortuitous meeting that I had with you and all the stuff that we've worked on, but even when I didn't know hardly anything about the beer industry, I joined Fermenta and got the same welcome from that group of women that was in my mind, a trickle-down effect from the beer culture in Michigan as a whole. And anytime I've walked in any place, I've gotten that same welcome, even though when I walk in and my background is from the healthcare industry. It's the conversations I've had with the both of you, but it is going to further generations, and I'm seeing it over and over and over. All the places that I went, the servers I've run into, I think that it has grown and taken on a bigger life than I think that you guys even A, know, and B, could have envisioned from the beginning. And to me, that has professionally for me has been a very encouraging thing after being beat up in the healthcare industry for so long. And I think it's something that needs to be emulated outside of the beer industry. And for that, thank you both, because it's meant a lot to me personally and professionally.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
and it makes me want to echo something I said earlier, which is we're going to need it. Mm-hmm. The world is going to start telling us that was a nice period and now it's time to fight each other. We have to disagree. Media is already telling us, here it comes, expect more of this. I've watched breweries post things on social media saying, oh, here it is, the bubble we've all been waiting for. It's time to kill each other. That's what I read between the lines. And I vehemently disagree. And I think that the trickle down and the influence that this organization and the people that have contributed to it has created is now time to activate that muscle of everybody in the newer rings and generations. We need to stick to our beliefs despite what the industry may tell us. It is not time to give up on our ethos. It is time to double down.
Makes it easier for me to go to the hospital because I know I'll be walking out that door and running into the beer people again.
Awesome. Well, thank you for mentioning that. It is.
Yeah, that's nice.
It's really confirming, and I think we knew it was big work, but I don't think we had the range of vision to understand what it was going to look like or how much of an impact it was going to have. So it's pretty it's pretty humbling and gratifying to feel that stuff we did in the early years has grown from a sprout to a tree.
Yeah, agreed. It's hard to have perspective on that.
Well, it is when you're there for all of it.
Well, and if we tried to have a perspective for it and say, look what we can do, and tried to describe this year, we would have been off point.
Yeah.
It doesn't-
What we needed to
doesn't work
do,
like that.
what we needed to do was get to know each other and work together and make things happen. And then that grew.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing we did was decide we weren't each other's enemy. It was huge.
And that is a huge, huge message today.
Thanks for listening and sharing while supporting Michigan breweries and craft beer everywhere. The Michigan Brewers Guild was formed in 1997 with its first summer beer festival taking place in July of 1998. Its now 5 annual festivals are dedicated exclusively to Michigan beer brewed by more than 270 member breweries. The Michigan Brewers Guild exists to promote and protect the passionate Michigan beer industry in every way possible. To learn more, visit us at mibeer.com or say hello on one of our social media pages, as we love hearing from you. From coast to coast, from far and near, let's drink Michigan beer.